And we're back now with more from our panel. Michael, I want to try and get you to help me explain, think about what the turf looks like now that we're in a general election. There were a lot of things that were undone by Donald Trump, masterfully really, in the primaries in terms of just changing the playbook, as Reince Priebus called it, of politics. So how much is the playbook totally new now in the general election, or are there some standards that still apply?
Well, he's making an unusual message to the American people. This is not, he's pretty random on his policy views. It's very hard to determine them. It's kind of like quantum physics. They change all the time, okay?
Schrodinger's Trump.
He's offering himself to be in charge of everything, essentially. It's a very much a personal appeal he's making. The side effect of that, by the way, is that we're very likely to get a negative election here. You're going to have two personalities against one another, not necessarily two visions. I think, given Trump's penchant for attacking back with even greater intensity, this could be a very negative election based on personality rather than, on policy views, which he changes all the time.
That's right. And Julie, it feels like we're going to have, it's not only based on personality, but both parties feel like they're having an arranged marriage here, where we talked about the unity in the Republican Party that's a little difficult getting that put together. But in the Democratic Party, when that contest is over, there's also going to be this kind of arranged marriage.
And it's being put off longer and longer as Bernie Sanders continues to win in several states. He will probably have more victories coming up. You do see Hillary Clinton trying to reach out to Sanders voters. I think what her campaign and what Democrats broadly believe is that having Trump as the Republican nominee will be more of a motivating factor for these Sanders supporters than anything else. But at a certain point, she does have to be able to turn her attention toward the general, toward uniting her party. And the longer that Sanders keeps winning, the harder that becomes for her.
It's very hard to say, why won't you get out of the race? You keep winning.
Right?
Yeah. Right.
She didn't like when people made that argument against her in 2008, certainly.
And I think when you look at the West Virginia primary, which of course Sanders won, the scariest number for the Clinton people were 38% of Sanders voters said they would vote for Trump. Now, West Virginia has some peculiar politics, but that shows the kind of appeal of the anti-establishment candidate that both Sanders and Trump have been.
What if that's right, Jamelle? What if it's just, we're so fed up with Washington that, and Reince Priebus used the word earthquake, that they want the earthquake. And forget positions, schmissions. We want the earthquake, and that's Donald Trump.
I think that might be true in the Republican Party. I'm just not sure how true it is in the Democratic Party. You ask Sanders voters, separate and apart from the West Virginia primary, you ask them, what do you think of President Obama? Huge approval. You ask them, what do you think of Hillary Clinton? Pretty good approval. You ask them, do you want, what kind of policy would you like to see continued? And it's usually kind of an Obama-style mix. So I think much as was true in 2008, the heat of a primary has sort of created the perception in the Democratic Party that there are these steep divisions. And no doubt, I think there are generational divisions in the Democratic Party that Sanders has revealed and may play themselves out in various ways going forward. But in terms of the presidential race, I tend to think that there really isn't that much disunity in the Democratic Party, and that if Sanders decides to campaign vociferously for the Democratic Party, which he continuously says, him and his surrogates, that they will do everything they can to keep Donald Trump out of the White House. I don't think this will be such a problem, and I don't think, given that the Democratic Party is almost like it's close to majority non-white, I just do not think that Trump is the earthquake that anyone in the Democratic Party is looking for.
Michael, let me ask you about the Trump cabinet, which is, in talking to some Republicans, they've said, well, if he puts Chris Christie in here and Ben Carson in there and maybe brings in Giuliani, they take comfort in the people he might surround himself with. Is that a good way for him to make the case to a larger group of Republicans? Hey, give them stability.
I think the way to make the case to a larger group of Republicans is to look like you might win. I think that's what persuades a lot of people that are interested in power in Washington, and then all of a sudden they find ways to accommodate in these circumstances. I think, though, that the foreign policy establishment of the Republican Party is probably the least attached to the Republican Party. They've been the most critical of his views, say, on tariffs with China and our ties with our allies, just basic things, which you saw some in the Gates interview as well. These are radical, dangerous foreign policy positions that he's undertaken. I think the foreign policy establishment has a lot to swallow in order to participate in a Trump administration.
Robert Gates, pretty good Republican, right? Who do you think he's going to vote for? from listening to that interview. He didn't answer that question, but it sure sounded like he was more comfortable with Hillary Clinton than with Donald Trump.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks to our panel. We'll be back in a moment with that interview with Secretary Gates. Stay with us.